thanks for joining us. We're going to get started, and with the agendas on the wall up here, we're probably going to go for about 45 or so minutes, leaving the last 15 or so open for conversation and discussions. And then when we get done to about 12 o'clock, we're also just going to pop into the next room, and we'll have an opportunity to speak and talk and answer any questions. I mean, this is every Sunday in the month of May from about 11 to 12:30 that these are happening. And although we have certain topics, this is not about us and a rigid topic. It is about you and whatever questions you have. And obviously we're on Facebook Live, we're here in person as well. And on Facebook, obviously you can, it's being monitored now, you can tune into and ask questions, and we will get to those towards the end of the presentation. So a little housekeeping. Obviously, if you need to get up and walk around, walk around. Restrooms are back over here. We want to thank the Holy Donut. We want to thank Coffee by Design. We want to thank Otto's for supplying us with the food today. We also want to thank our folks and our friends at Total Mortgage. They were here last week. And I was reminiscing with another person in the audience today about the great job that they do. There's a lot of different lenders out there. Ed is fantastic. We also have, depending on somebody's needs on the buyer's side, great resources no matter what you're doing. So as we look at today's topic, I'm very fortunate to have my good friend Mickey here. Mickey is a
landscape gardener.
Landscape gardener. Okay, thank you for filling in. And Mickey and I met 20 years ago, something like that. So I bought.
How long have you been married?
Right around that. Yeah. We met even before that. So I own a lovely Victorian house that was not lovely when I first bought it on Back Cove. It was on Coyle Street, a little historic area called Coyle Park. So if you think of Rev or Reve, cycling, and Blake Orchard, you sort of go down to a boulevard from there. But it was owned by a guy, F. Woodman Jones. His name was, he'd go by Woody Jones. And he was an attorney in town. And he kind of just used the house as an office, right? And didn't really, I guess, see the world around him the way that we would think of people normally seeing the world around them and trying to make it something, I guess, better or whatever. So the house fell into disrepair. He would go over there and use one room as his office. And obviously, not only inside and the exterior of the home was in disrepair, the gardens were in significant disrepair as well. It got to the point, my neighbors told me, that the bus stop that was out front of my house got moved down the street because the rock wall fell into the sidewalk, and it was unsafe for the kids to be sort of around that neighborhood. Do you remember this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Mickey, I met her through neighbors of mine after I bought the house, and I was out there, just slugging away trying to make it work. I think you probably walked over and tried to lend me a hand, and then we developed this friendship over the course of time. So landscape gardener, master gardener, whatever you want to call it, she's amazing, and I'm fortunate to have her as a friend, somebody that I can confide in. We worked together after the initial sort of taming of this crazy jungle of a place with overgrown shrubs to develop a plan and develop a plan of what we were going to plant that year, and then ongoing. And each year in the fall and in the spring we get together and we talk again about the future and what we're going to do. So I'm super psyched to have her here. We're going to talk about things like that. We're going to talk about your questions and answers and stuff. And she has Mickey's top tips we'll pass around right now.
Don't pass them around, I'm going to read them. You can read along with me.
So before we dive into that, I do want to talk a little bit, and again, going back to these subjects there's no lines exactly in them. And what Mary Haynes will do too is we've got some sheets out back as well, and they talk about seller tips. So part of this is gardening in general, landscaping, landscape design, plant health, the importance of that for just our own enjoyment, and answering your questions in a very general sense. But it also is about with an eye towards obviously real estate. That's the office you're sitting in now. So what can be done, what should you do, and what are some of the most beneficial things you can think about when you're thinking about selling your home, and whether that's selling now or in the future. So the Seller Tips and Tricks has additional things, whether it's from our photographer, Patrick Drost, who was here the other day, and he gave some tips about landscaping and what to do to get ready for those pictures, or things like what I give for advice to sellers when we're coming into a home. Now, sort of transitioning to that phase of this conversation, if you think about yourself as a seller, right? So I'm a seller, I'm sitting in the audience, and I'm thinking about putting my house on the market, say, this year. When I typically go in, and I just did this in North Deering, in a lovely Victorian home. She's been on the property for over 30 years, right? She's loved it, the kids are raised, it's too big, what are we gonna do? And then she wants to list this year. So typically, like with interior things in that situation, we talk about removing distractions and as opposed to making big capital improvements. That's no different inside the house. You think of a kitchen or a bathroom or interior of a home than it is outside the house. So typically, if you go back to that inside, I'm not telling people to, hey, let's rip out your kitchen, right? Let's gut that bathroom and let's put a new one in. Those are capital improvements, usually much too costly, much too time consuming to really be beneficial to you unless you really want to wait 2 or 3 years out, right, to do that. So inside, I usually say to folks, hey, let's declutter, let's organize, let's paint, let's do some of those low budget, high impact things that get you a big impact. We go to the outside of the house, it's really no different. When I walk around the house with a seller and my team, it is a brainstorming session. We are collaborating with the owner, we're walking through, and we're giving them ideas and the resources. And that's one of the nice things I think about our team is we've been doing this for 20 years, and I've been in Portland, ever since I was a kid. So we have a deep bench of local contacts that we trust and we know. And if you're working with us and we sort of say, hey, this is a client, or you reach out to that vendor, you're going to get a different priority than you would maybe normally, right? Everybody's super busy, and sometimes when you call a handyman or a landscaper, whoever it may be, literally people will say, I'm booked until next year. And that's commonplace right now. So that's not what's going to benefit you if you're trying to list your property this year or in the fall or whatever that may be. So when we looked at that outside and going back to this property in North Deering, we're walking around and there are some basic things that we tell folks to do. And we have a wonderful landscape company that comes in and they're like a little team of ninjas getting in there and getting everything done. So we have a variety of them, but Lopez Landscaping is somebody I've worked with frequently. They've got a great crew, and they are keeping a portion of their schedule open for our clients. So if you need somebody, reach out to us and we'll connect you with Alicio and his team. So when I walk around that house, we're looking at trees and shrubs. Can we take some of them down with caution? Obviously, trees and shrubs are precious, so we don't want to remove them arbitrarily. But oftentimes, if a home is got a significant amount of tree cover and you can't see the house, it's tough to photograph that house. The other thing is it obviously creates a situation inside where the home is dark. Homes filled with natural light sell better. Like any alive creature, we're drawn to natural light. So it's important to try to think about the exterior, in that regard, about creating light and visibility of the property from the street. The other thing is, simple things like edging beds, putting in dark mulch versus lighter mulch. Now, we've all seen this mulch that's sort of red in color, right? It's almost like a dyed mulch. Is it dyed?
It's dyed.
It's dyed. To me, it's terrible. There's a mistake right there. Don't put in that dyed red mulch. Now, if there is I had a property on the lake recently we listed on Big Sebago. Around the home, or around the gardens that were manicured gardens, we used the dark mulch, and then we used a different type of mulch. I mean, it was like a fir or something like that. It wasn't dyed, but it had this sort of brownish, look to it.
Like playground chips?
No, not even that. It was like a mulch. I'll find out what it is and I'll share it with people online. But it created this nice contrast between the sort of wild lands around underneath the fir trees and these things that had this sort of almost reddish natural hue to the more dark mulch that you would see on any garden around here. So that's one tip. You know, move towards that, edge the beds. Simple things like planting some annuals, making sure that the trees are not, as Mickey would say, like little lollipops or meatballs. So there's certain ways that you can landscape and trim things without going to that level. Gardens have become more, and we think about the effects, guys, of COVID over the last maybe 3 years here. One of them is the home has to be more, right? And wanting outdoor space has become super important to buyers. So if I have a home, and obviously you can enjoy those things, but if you can create some of that outdoor space for people to also enjoy it, doesn't have to be the $30,000 patio and built-in hot tubs and all these type of things with a big ticket. It can be a simple patio. It could be a simple area like in the back of my home where we have wood chips and we have a little playground, we have a little seating area, and that's relatively inexpensive. But it allows those people, if they're coming to see your house, to have that experience outside. Now, we're also seeing a lot of fire pits, and they don't have to be, again, super expensive. You don't have to hire the big landscape company to spend $10,000 on that. You can literally go get some stones, get some bricks, whatever you want that to be, pavers, and assemble this in about a day, if that. But again, when you're thinking about your own enjoyment, that's really nice to have. But for a picture opportunity and for the sale, it's also wonderful. It invites people outside. We usually surround that with some Adirondack chairs. And we will even, as I did on the property on the West End, it was probably early March when I listed it. I brought over the logs, we lit a fire. It's like this lifestyle thing. And when we have an open house, we'll even light that fire there to get people to linger and sit. We have some hot chocolate going. You're selling a lifestyle and you want them to envision their future life at that property. Another thing that's really important too, and we've seen a lot of people because of the home needing to be more, is having gardens. Whether that's raised beds, and Mickey and I have worked on this over the years. I haven't taken such good care of my vegetable gardens, but and whether people do or they don't, if you're going to sell, that's also a potentially really easy thing to do. Get one of these raised beds that they sell online or at one of the gardening shops and plant some vegetables. You can get the seedlings to start, and it is again a transformation of the current to them living there in the future and enjoying that type of thing. We're selling a lifestyle, we're selling a future dream of what that's going to be for that family or that individual. So just simple, easy things to do, whether again for your enjoyment or future enjoyment. Now, obviously, there are additional things that can be done. There's extensive landscaping that can happen, but normally we're again just removing those distractions, creating a simple thing, and then when we get ready for pictures, as is one of the sheets in here that Patrick spoke about, our photographer, is just as simple as a fresh cut lawn, making sure that that lawn is newly cut, that you fluff up that landscape ground cover and those type of things, and the mulch, so that when people come through, there's something about fresh cut grass which delivers a memory for us, right? And then there's something about that mulch as well that sort of, especially this time of year, it just makes everything's great in the world in the spring. So that's my introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Mickey. We're happy to have her.
You stole some of my thunder.
You can no.
That's all right.
Yeah.
You can hear it again.
So do you want to hear about home buyers first or home sellers?
Buyers.
Buyers. For buyers, I'm recommending that you live with your new landscape for a growing season. That way you'll understand how the sun works, and you can get soil tests and decide whether the plants that are there already are ones that you want. And you need to also consider how you're going to interact with the landscape. Whether you're gardeners, whether you have pets, whether you have children, do you entertain much? Then you can, when you work with a landscape designer, you will have an idea of what you want and not be completely out in the woods. If possible, get maintenance advice from your previous owners. Consult professionals, arborists, landscapers, gardeners, and you can find local landscape people in the membership directory of the Maine Landscape and Nursery Association. It's all over the state. Whenever possible, buy local and enjoy your landscape. Questions? Yes?
In your shared experience, does it ever make sense to think about, is it hardscaping? So the balance between landscaping and the potential to add a driveway or a walkway, what's the balance that you guys usually try to strike?
Well, the driveway sort of designs itself because it's either off the street or there's a road or the balance of hardscape and plants, I think, should be more toward plants, just because it's better for the environment.
Yeah, great question. I think everybody in the room may have a different equation on that, right? And sometimes it's even within a couple that owns a house together could say, hey, do we want to have 2-car off street, or do we want to have more of a garden? I'm just thinking of that typical driveway, which isn't much wider than this or even more narrow, and they could be tandem, right? So do I give 2 spaces? And even if it's paved now, do I eliminate one of those, right? It's interesting. I think depending on where you are, if you're urban, you're on the peninsula, let's just say, maybe there's less need for either you as you're living there currently, or a future person to have 2 cars. So then maybe you go in that direction of eliminating one of those spaces. Beyond 2 cars, I think that's something where I would say, let's eliminate these entirely paved yards, right? I think that's kind of a bummer. Permeable pavement.
Correct me if I'm off base about this, but isn't there some sort of regulation about how much non-permeable spaces you have on your property?
Absolutely, you bet. Yeah.
And is it different with different cities?
Different with different cities, different with different zones as well. It's a percentage of your lot coverage that you have as impermeable. If it's currently that way, though, there's no regulation saying that, because this stuff happened after the fact. So if you're going to repave an entire lot, now there's ways around it. You can put in a catch basin. It's about water runoff of the lot. And it's also interesting. Permeable. You would think pea stone or something like that is permanent. It's not. So it's kind of a weird thing, because think of how permeable that would be. But the city does not consider it that way. So if you think of a new renovation or an expansion of a driveway or patio, those are things to consider. Now, there's also catch basins even under patios, which are really fascinating. And there's one, you probably know about it, on Deering Avenue, which is an incredible garden. And under the driveway, they put in this whole big catch basin, which feeds and it collects water for the gardens. So.
Is there an impact on property value there, as far as what you'd see the most return on, adding a 2-car kind of driveway versus leaving that space all green and putting some money into landscaping? Do you have any insights into what the return on either would be?
Yeah, I tell you. Yeah, I mean, again, it's debatable. Again, if I'm off the peninsula, boy, we're not a city of mass transit. We're just not there yet, and people are not using the bus really effectively or enough, right? Whether that's our mentality or it's the public transportation system. So I think off the peninsula, having a 2-car space is really super desirable. So I would be reluctant to, if you have it now, give that up, or if you don't have it, to not make that at least 2 cars. and preferably side by side, but tandem is okay because unless you're in a multifamily, that's probably all right, right? That being said, you do have more and more people, as Mickey you're talking about, with a lot more carbon consciousness and that want to have green space. And they want to have, we've developed, and Mickey's worked with us on this, many properties in town, whether they were for condominiums or for resale, where we have purposely given portions of them. And I'm working on, you can see the pictures of it in the front room over here, a brand new 7-unit condominium complex on Morning Street. Now, each of those owners are going to get a garden plot, and it's got organic soil, it's ready to go in there. But as opposed to grass and as opposed to a paver patio, we felt that was important to give people an opportunity to experience something they probably are leaving in a house they own in the suburbs to have in the city, and that's a significant value. So even if it's a small lot, and I'm thinking of 2 houses that we did up on the east end on Howard Street. So it was 10 Howard and then 18 Howard, and originally one of them had just a barren lot, entire thing was paved, and it's just a narrow driveway straight ahead, but we cut it short. It had 2 tandem spaces, but the whole back, it had a fence and a little hedge, and we created a little micro garden right there for them, and I think that had a lot to do with, and we also planted raised beds for them.
Does it still exist?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Both of them. So that's a big draw. Go ahead, sorry, I babble on.
The lady in the second row had a question.
I did. So I moved here from New Mexico.
Oh.
So the idea that I have to mow and pay someone to mow is like driving me crazy. Too much grass. So from a main and a carbon conscious perspective, but even grass isn't that good for the environment.
Correct.
So can you give some tips? I mean, all I do is look at this backyard and go, I just need to kill a lot of grass
Well,
and replace it with something. Do you have any suggestions?
you can do what I've done in my property, and I've turned practically the whole place into garden. We have a little patch of lawn in the backyard because my husband says we have to have some grass. And I think it's about maybe 10 by 10, and the rest of the property is gardens, ground covers.
Are there some ground covers you'd recommend that work well?
There are a lot of natives that turn themselves into ground covers if you don't mulch too much. Asters, there are a lot of weeds that can be ground covers. Wildflowers.
Okay.
Asters, I plant lots of daffodils, and there are, barren strawberry is a really good ground cover. There are geraniums that are really good ground covers.
Did you have to kill the grass first or do something?
The biggest bed that I made, I cut the grass really short, laid down Wall Street journals, because at that point they didn't use dyes in their paper, and piled it with compost, and in 2 years then I had a bed.
Okay.
And I just kept doing that and killed all the grass.
You could probably remove the turf, right?
Yeah, you could,
Could
yeah.
To remove what?
The turf, the top layer of the grass, right?
Right, but if you do that, then it's a lot more work.
Right.
It's backbreaking work.
Yeah.
And you get rid of your top layer of soil.
Tilling it under, just gonna create more grass? Sorry to ask a stupid question.
No, that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah. Yeah, rototilling it, and would that just create more?
Well, if you rototill, then that kicks up all sorts of weed seeds.
Okay.
So the least amount of disturbance that you can do to your soil is optimal.
So now you're saying the Wall Street journals you don't know, so it would be the ideas with
I would
newspapers.
use paper bags,
Oh yeah,
cardboard,
cardboard,
Yeah.
there's a lot of cardboard.
anything that will eventually eventually rot. And
Okay.
just pile compost on top of that.
And is there, and I'll let other people, is there a source of compost here? I mean, I know, what is it called, the garbage to garden?
Garbage to garden is a good source. Any of your landscape company, any of your garden centers, Skillins, Allen Sterling and Lothrop, O'Donnell's, all have compost.
Okay,
Riverside also has compost. That's the dump.
okay,
On Riverside Street.
I'm not living in Portland, so.
Where do you live?
Cape Elizabeth.
Cape Elizabeth. Cape Elizabeth dump might have compost
I
available.
bet you're right, they do, okay.
Because people bring their yard waste and then they turn it into compost.
You just pull up in the truck and they put it in for you in a little.
Well, you pay
Load
for
it.
it. And
Yeah.
yeah, they just load it into your truck.
And 2 years,
Yeah,
how would I know, I mean, is it pretty obvious that it's ready
well,
for
if you
planting?
can stick a shovel in, it's ready to plant.
Okay,
What about fabrics or that type of thing? Black plastics and those things? no?
Well, when you put down black plastic, it solarizes the soil, so it kills things.
Okay,
If you've got a really bad weed problem
okay.
and you want to kill that, you can do that with black plastic. But I wouldn't recommend it for building a bed.
Okay.
Unless there's some nasty weed in there that you have to kill. You could also do it with Roundup, but I don't recommend that.
So, I mean, the other thing you make me think of is our soil and the quality of our soil here in Portland. You know, we have some of the oldest housing stock in the country, and
It's
typically it's
highly leaded.
Yeah. So, what do you do about that with raised beds? How do you get around that?
Well, with raised beds, you would need to build your bed or get one of those stock tanks and fill it with brand new soil and try to not disturb the soil around it.
They have to drain, right? So there's
Right.
what, fabric on the bottom? Is there a floor in those things?
Well, you drill holes in them, or they come with holes. I haven't really used those. I've just seen other people using them.
And is there a favorite group of stores that you recommend for all of this type of stuff? Or
Local people.
okay.
And I don't know whether, it could be that the parish farmers union sells stock tanks, I don't know.
And are they the ones on Warren Ave? Is that where they're?
Yeah, I think they
used to
might
be.
be closed,
Are they closed there?
yeah.
Okay.
I think they might still be open in Paris, but.
Right. I think they have multiple locations, but so you got Allen, Sterling, Lothrop, and
Mhm.
Route 1 in Falmouth.
Yeah,
Skillins off of 88.
yeah.
Right? Who else do we got?
O'Donnell's
McDonald's.
out 22.
That's in Gorham, Scarborough line, right?
Mhm.
Right in there, right? Estabrooks
Yarmouth.
in Yarmouth, right?
I like the garden spot. I don't know if they're open anymore, but they're up in Pownell.
Yeah, I haven't ever been there, but I've heard really good things about it.
Yeah, they're great.
And there are all sorts of little plant sellers around. A lot of people bring their plants to the farmer's market, so you can get plants really easily. And the trend, it's a trend that I firmly believe in. A lot of people are planting natives because it's better for the pollinators, it's better for the environment, and they're just joyous plants.
How do you find out about that? How do you find out what's native that I would have access to plant?
The Maine Cooperative Extension has a list. O'Donnell's has a list. I don't know about Skillins and Estabrooks, probably, because it's very fashionable right now. But the Maine Cooperative Extension is a good source. They can tell you, when you do buy a property, get your soil tested. Because especially in Portland, right around the houses, it's going to be full of lead, and they don't want you to grow vegetables there, or even disturb the soil. I got my side yard tested, which had been a dump for the coal furnaces, And they said, you shouldn't be ever doing anything in this garden.
You shouldn't walk in it,
No, you shouldn't.
which is kind of scary, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned as well this idea of natives. Are there things that you're using now, and what you would recommend, and maybe these more urban settings
What do you mean?
for native plants,
Things.
or you know, I mean,
Plants.
in general.
What things? What things?
Yeah, so plants, like native plants, are there typicals that you go to that do well?
Well, my favorite tree is Amelanchier canadensis, and it's a shad tree, also serviceberry. It blooms in the spring. It's a white plume. It makes berries for the birds. There are viburnums that are big shrubby things that make berries for the birds. Anything that makes berries for the birds, or anything that blooms really well and the bees travel to, are great plants.
Before we finish, I'm going to find out the name of this local company that does it. Maybe you know it. They will come into your lot, your house, and they will actually plant a garden for you. And they'll help you, either they'll just plant it, a vegetable garden usually, or they will even tend it, they'll even harvest it for you, but it's on your property. And this is the same company we're using to do the beds, to get people kick-started on these condos we're doing up on the East End. And I just thought that was a clever sort of thing to make it easy and approachable. They'll come set up this or that, they'll bring in the organic soil. You can talk to them about what you want and the varieties of vegetables you want. And that is a trend we're seeing as well, edible landscapes. I mean, literally in other parts of the world, it's one of the ways that they're combating hunger, is making sure that even in public spaces that we're getting away from grass and plants that just require maintenance to things that people can eat. I mean, why not have berries and fruits and these types of things to produce and to give to people? So I thought that was fun.
And I know who you're talking about, but I don't know what their name is.
I'm forgetting what it is.
Yeah, didn't they
Do you
do?
remember?
I don't remember now, but we can provide,
Yeah.
we will provide a list of everything we're talking about right now. Like a directory to these places.
Didn't they do a garden on Coyle Street?
You don't have to-
They might have, and so
The one down
he's
on
a
the
city councilor as well. I can't think of his name. My goodness, the principal.
Oh,
What?
I know, oh gosh, he's in North Durham.
Yes.
Roberto,
Yes.
something, food gardens or something.
Something like that.
Something
Yeah,
like
it is a
garden.
wonderful, wonderful thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I walk around his.
Yeah. And I think it's a nice, easy step into that because, again, where we've fallen down on the job is we'll go away. We'll go away for a week or a weekend or whatever, my wife and I in the summer. And suddenly things have gone by, they get beyond you, you haven't harvested that, or you've neglected some weeding or those things. So, it's gardening light. Because it's work, right?
It is work.
Yeah.
Well, I love it,
Yeah.
but it's work.
So I have a beautiful garden that came with my house 15 years ago. It's all seasons, like it blooms different things, but I have not kept it up for lack of time, energy, you name it. Where do I start? Because I want it to, it still blooms and it's still got a lot of nice things, but it's not as pretty as it used to be because I have not done what I should have done to keep it up. So what's the suggestion for where?
Hire a landscape gardener to come and look and tell you what you need to do.
Okay. And where do I find those names?
The Maine Landscape and Nursery Association, their website will give you a landscape person in your area.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, it can be intimidating, right? No
It's
doubt.
very- yeah.
Yeah.
What about if you live, not in the city here, but on the outskirts? And, I have some gardens, I have some, I'm probably one of the two people that really do a lot, The others are like, you do too much, you make our house, but, we have a big backyard, we haven't really done much with it, because I'm thinking, well, if children they want that kind of a escape, obviously, I know my children are gone, so it's like, so I guess I need someone to tell me, what would you do, would you put not a hardscape, but like a patio, or would you, because, it's just, because otherwise they play in the street. And, it's a roundabout, it's a little circle, so it's not terrible in the sense that, there's a lot of cars, but, I don't know, that's, I really enjoy doing the gardening now that I have time and stuff, but, a lot of the new people, with their kids and stuff, they don't have the time, and they're like, you're making our house look bad. I'm like, sorry. I said, I was like you when I had kids, I was like, I didn't do as much, but,
It is a valid point, and there's a few things there that I think are worthy of touching base on, this idea of the intimidation factor of a new owner. And we've seen that happen, where people come in. I think of Betsy Pope, one of my former neighbors, who had this amazing double lot with incredible gardens. Now, I've heard on the real estate side from buyers they're like, oh my God, I love the house, but we're not gardeners. This is just kind of freaking us out. How much does that cost to maintain that? And I think there's some tips around that too. The idea that, well, you don't have to maintain that. You can hire somebody to maintain that. But when you're thinking of selling, you need to have that question answered in advance about who's the current gardener. And if it is a homeowner, let's find somebody else so that we can deliver 2 or 3 names to that future buyer so they're not freaked out by that. Now, also, if I have, an existing house, in my time horizon, from what I can predict, right? Obviously, things change in our lives, and we may have to sell in an unpredicted time. But if my time horizon is years, then I would say create what you want, right? As opposed to paving the whole thing, let's not do that, right? But people want indoor and outdoor space, and those spaces are blending. So you think of COVID, we wanted to be outside of our house, but still at our house, right? So the patios and the arbors and the fire pits and all these other things were wonderful experiences. Now, I think there's a limit to that. I've been in a house recently in Deering Center where they, did an amazing patio, but it's like half their backyard. It was felt a little too much, solid surface. So, if, for example, you're thinking about maybe selling in a year based on our conversations, I would be reluctant to invest that big money in the pavers and the patio and those things. And I would be reluctant to change a grass yard into something not now, because half of the buyers may want that, especially in a more suburban area like you're in North Deering. More families are going to buy that house, and they like grass. I mean, kids like grass. It's easy, right? As opposed to gardens and those things. So that's my
It can be a soccer pitch.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, place to play paths. Yeah.
I have a suggestion. The previous owners of our house were gardeners, and they put together like a 2-page, like a description of everything that was there and the kind of care that was required. And then they highlighted the things that were, kind of unique or special. So then that was very helpful for me.
Nice. Yep, that'd be good. I can do that.
Or you can do what happened to me, and the estate changed hands and I went with it.
So transitioning maybe to sellers on your list here, what are some of the other things here?
Well, what you said, keep it tidy, mow, weed, mulch. Make sure that they're not shrubs, trees impacting the house, because you don't want it, as far as making it dark, yes, it makes it dark, but it also makes it kind of moldy if you have shrubbery too close to the house. And Tom also mentioned adding annuals to the perennial beds for color. That's a good thing to do.
Now, one thing Mickey has done for me as well is, you have these planters, like in our front porch.
Yeah.
You know, so that's another way, whether you do it on an ongoing basis to just enjoy, or you say, hey, I'm getting ready for a sale, and I've got this front porch, and can I soften that? You know, it's sort of like dogs, you know, seemingly most people love dogs. It's sort of, that, I don't think anybody dislikes flowers and that bloom of color. Whether it lines the steps coming in, or there's some hanging pots on that front porch, you know, it just creates a different feel to it versus nothing. And then the fresh cut flowers inside too.
And cookies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cookies in the oven.
Absolutely.
Buy local whenever possible, and most of all, enjoy your landscape. Keep on gardening.
I liked one of the things you said earlier about buyers too, is this idea of waiting. And you know, if you buy a property now, you're starting to see things come up. But as we know, things come up at different times, and I think that's one of the potential mistakes that buyers make, clearly, right?
Well, I have a case in point. Not my design, but a friend of mine designed a garden for this property, and they came in and they built the steps so that they came straight out to the front drive, front to the street. And then they realized, we get out of our cars and we have to walk all the way around. So they took these granite steps off and made them come down to the driveway at twice the price. And if they had lived in that place for just a little while, they would have known that having the steps come out to the street was the wrong thing to do.
You make me think of the brainstorming that we do with buyers when we walk through a house, right? So we'll be there the first showing, or once they put it under contract, you start to dream about a house that maybe isn't perfect and what you could do to it to make it more of what you want. And I also think that's a moment of pause. Try to give it a little bit of a pause, because you don't know the seasonality of it, where the sun's going to come up. And some of that brainstorming may be right, but some of that brainstorming with you, with the agent, or whoever it may be things where you're like, oh man, I'm so happy I didn't do that and have to undo it. Right? You really have one shot at it, and you should try to do it right, as opposed to, you know, here's what I'm doing now, and then I'm going to want to redo that, whether it's that front steps or something else. So live with it a little bit. And usually you're going to change that opinion that you first walked through. The other thing to keep in mind too is involve more people in that decision making. The idea is to make well-informed decisions. And there's one thing that I've learned over the years, and I've probably owned 30 houses, no joke, and I've restored probably 20. I mean, full-scale restorations and renovations, including my own home. And initially, you know, I was sort of a do everything myself kind of guy, and try to figure it out and maybe brainstorm a little bit and work on it. Over the years, I have continued to work on being humble and understanding there's areas of genius and involving people like Mickey and helping me. Now, it's not just giving it over, it's a collaborative effort. What do you like? And then talking about it and going back and forth. We have a wonderful banter about this stuff, and we have a lot of fun. But it's not just gardens, it's everything. It's like, okay, I'm going to involve maybe an architect or a landscape architect or a interior designer in helping me make a more informed decision. Now, you don't have to hire them. It doesn't have to be so intimidating. I remember being very intimidated when I hired my first interior designer to help me do something. But each one of them has a different way, and many of them are not going to be like, okay, this is great. This is about me being on the cover of a magazine. It is more of a collaborative effort, and again, it's about helping you make good decisions. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, to your point, like I've now lived here through all the seasons, and I'm still trying to figure out about what to do with snow. Or even, I mean, or my backyard, there's like Sebago Lake in my backyard. It like melts, and there's like a deep water pool, and not a vernal pool in the spring,
it sounds to me like you need to consult a landscape architect.
Okay,
They're much more knowledgeable than I am about drainage problems
so it's a drainage issue.
and landforms and why is the water settling there and is there a way to get it away from that? And there's a thing called a French drain that's you dig a drain and take the water, well, you can't take it to your neighbor's property, that would not be right, but a landscape architect would be able to figure that out for you.
Yeah, controlling the water on your site, and I showed a property in Portland recently, off of Washington Avenue, near Ananias Market. So just go over Wash Ave, across the bridge, 500 yards on the left-hand side. Well, the crazy thing about it is this is a 6-unit building, and it's on a double lot, and in the backyard is a place where ducks go. I mean, literally, it's a pond as big as this little area right here. And it wasn't there before, but when Ananias paved their lots, it created this situation and created water in a lot of these basements around it. So, talking with the buyer, knowing what I know from other properties that I've worked on, is they're exactly like Mickey is talking about. You can create these, basically let's dry that out as best we can. You're gonna dig down, and you can't push it away. A lot of times these things are, that's the lowest spot. That's where the water wants to go. So it isn't like you can build it up and push it off to your neighbors. And there's ramifications just like with Ananias with that, right? But catch basins can be put in, or again, digging down, putting rocks in, putting some fabric on them, and then filling it back in to create a place no different really, but on a much smaller scale than what they're doing around Baxter Boulevard right now. We're handling the storm surge, right? And then it allows it to dissipate after that. So you want to be able to handle that spring and winter surge of water with the rains and all of that, and then allow that to be a big sort of open reservoir. Not on the surface though, right? That's not ideal. So.
Is it wet all summer?
No, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not actually, some part is near the house, but a lot of it's just, we're all this grass. Just some kind of, what were you thinking?
I was thinking that it might be a candidate for a rain garden, but if it's not, if it's not wet all summer.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I not placing a rain garden? What's a rain garden?
It's just it's a garden that is full of plants that can handle wet feet.
Oh,
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
how about a pond? Like
Yeah.
a little,
Yeah, you could put a pond in.
embrace it.
The people that bought Nan's house on Belmont Street
Yeah.
took the pond out
Right,
because they had little kids.
Right.
And it was actually a hazard.
So are there other questions or thoughts or? Well, we'll get.
Go ahead.
Would you recommend soil testing yourself or hiring a professional? What does that process look like?
You go to the cooperative extension and they give you a little box and a form to fill out with all the instructions, and it goes to R&O.
That's wonderful, thank you.
So multiple spots around your house.
Well, it depends on where you want your gardens to be.
Okay.
So wherever you want your gardens to be, you do a soil test for.
But if say that you're talking vegetable garden.
Any kind of garden.
Anyway, okay.
Because where you wanted to plant blueberries, no.
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 Yeah, Mickey just did this at my
I
house.
just got a soil test for
Yeah.
Tom.
So we had a section of my property out back where we literally dug down, was it 3 feet? Something like that.
Yeah.
And we planted raspberries there, but we had to bring in soil for that. It was.
And just across the path is where Maddie wants blueberries,
Yeah.
which is high lead.
Yeah, you can't do it. So then we're like, okay, Mickey's suggesting these. Are they aluminum or what are those?
Yeah, stock tanks.
Okay. So these are like feed tanks, right, for animals, I guess, right?
Mhm.
And then they're being used
Water
for this.
tanks.
And you see them in wood, and you can custom design them. So
Yeah. The metal ones last longer than the wood ones.
I have a lot of clay because it's become moss. The grass is not grass anymore now, it's moss.
Mhm.
Is that best left alone? Is it best to try to plant something else in there?
I would leave it alone. When you're working, a lot of people try to amend their soil so that they can grow what they want. I am of the feeling that you should pick the right plant for your conditions. That it's a whole lot easier to just put the right plant in the right place rather than trying to make the soil be right for it. And if you've got moss, don't kill it. It's a pioneer species, and it makes a seed bank for a seed bed for a lot of other things.
Good to know. Thank you.
If you, excuse me, if you do have contaminated soil, can you either bring in some fresh soil and just dump on top of it, maybe, I don't know how many inches, or can you excavate X number of inches and do something else?
Either of those is horribly expensive. I would grow my vegetables in raised beds or in stock tanks and not try to grow vegetables on contaminated soil.
If it's contaminated, does that mean you shouldn't even be walking on it? I mean, on a regular basis, or?
The people who are really excited about lead will say that's true, that you shouldn't even be wandering around on it, that you shouldn't dig it.
Which is interesting, you know, and when I bought my house, it was a combination of crazy overgrown trees, a little bit of grass, a little bit of vegetable, or not vegetable, but perennial beds. We got rid of it all, started from scratch, I think, except for one bush, right, in that corner. And it's all gardens now. There's absolutely no grass, even on the median strip, right? So it's all gardens that we've continued. And you
Gardens
mentioned
and maple trees.
and maple trees. So that's one of the things too, you know, this idea of it's an iterative process. So underneath that maple tree, Mickey calls it, what do we call what we're going to put underneath there? Thugs?
Yes.
Plants that really do well in that particular place. So as opposed to changing the soil or the pH or whatever it is, let's figure out something that's going to live underneath that tree that just kills everything basically. But what we did is, I didn't want to have grass. I didn't want to not disturb that, so we did that. But where I'm putting my vegetables, either we put some edges around it and got rid of all that soil that was in that particular spot. Again, going down like 3 feet, bringing in all fresh soil. But that was only probably a 10 by 5 area, right? And then we did another small one as well, and then we'll do raised beds beyond that. Because you can imagine it would be so tremendously expensive. And I think you're going to go much deeper than what you would bring in for soil to prevent those roots from getting into that bad stuff. So.
Well, you raised a good question. Like my neighbors have maple trees. They overhang my property.
Mm-hmm.
The end result is in the wintertime, I have no privacy, right? So are there things, that's a project I wanted to do is am I allowed to like clip off their talk to them, but are the branches that are overhanging my property, am I allowed to do anything?
You correct me if I'm wrong on this. It's my understanding that whatever hangs over your property is your business. That you can.
Believe it or not, it's something you want to approach gingerly, right, with your neighbor. Like you said, you want to work with them. And many times you have Norway Maples, which are an invasive species, and hey, we can feel like those should be eliminated, like when the city of Portland on the Western Pond last year nuked the trees that were invasive species, right? The people were like, oh my God, what the hell are they doing? They're clear cutting that land. Well, they were, getting rid of a lot of those invasive species and even invasive vines, right? So there's a debate there of whether, again, just because it's invasive, we should eliminate it and that's okay, or hey, it's a tree and every tree is precious because it removes carbon. I get both of those right at the same time. But Mickey's right. Technically, your lot line is your lot line from here to the heavens. You could cut that straight up that line. Is it the right thing to do? Boy, it looks terrible. I've seen people do it. It's a aggressive thing. So if that tree's roots and trunk is on that side of the line, but it comes over on this side, again, you can go straight up. Now, most of the time, going back to the idea of like when I bought my neglected house, we had 15 of these Norway Maples just growing up along the property line, and that's usually where they grow, because it's like, is that yours? Is that mine? And oftentimes we don't have surveys in our properties, which is kind of crazy to think that, but it's $3,000 or $4,000, and most people don't want to pay for a survey. So they just sort of say, well, that's sort of where it is. And then next thing you know, after 5 years of seeing that little sapling, which is cute, suddenly it gets to the point of being $1,000 to remove it or more. And nobody wants to do it. Now, sometimes if you go in and you say, hey, I'll split this with you, or I'll even pay for it to be done, they'll be like, thank you very much. And that's what I did with my, on this sort of line of my property with other properties. They loved it because it got rid of a lot of the leaves and a lot of the shade. So I think that's a potential solution, is to go and talk to them and see if you can split it, or if you can trim it up at the very least. But razor cutting it along the line is an aggressive stance, even though you could.
You could also go down as well and cut the roots, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. yeah, there's ways to do it.
We actually had a tree that was hanging over a fence, and it fell on the fence.
Yeah.
And so, the woman, she did finally get someone to take it off, but then when we had some trimming done, we asked her, we said, can we take that whole thing off, because it's just gonna fall off on our fence again and just, have a problem. So she was thrilled to death. We paid for it. We didn't expect her to pay for it, but we paid for it, and it
You'd be surprised what they'll let you do if you pay for it.
It worked out well. It really did.
When I bought my house, there was a barberry hedge on one side of it, and it poked my neighbor every time he got in his car. So he offered to pay half of it if I would have the barberry hedge taken out, and I was thrilled.
Any final questions that anyone has? Well, thank you very, very much, and thank you, Mickey. We'll be around for a little
Thank you.
while. We've got some pizza here from Otto's, and we'd love to connect with you guys for a little while after this. Thanks.